My brother was standing in the doorway of my condo wearing my housecoat. Not his. Mine. The soft gray one I bought at Hudson's Bay the winter I closed on the place. He had a coffee mug in his hand, also mine, and he looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has knocked on the wrong door. "You should have called first," he said. Then he closed the door in my face. I was standing in the hallway of the building I owned, holding a weekend bag, listening to the lock click shut from the inside. Let me back up, because I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, why didn't she just call the police right then? I thought the same thing, standing there in that hallway. But I need you to understand something first. I need you to understand who my brother is and who I was before that moment, because none of what happened next makes sense without that. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a project manager at a logistics company in Calgary, Alberta. I am not someone who grew up with money. My parents divorced when I was 9. My mother worked 2 jobs through most of my childhood, and I learned very early that if I wanted something, I had to build it myself. I saved aggressively through my 20s, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 1 roommate until I was 28, packed lunches every day, skipped vacations, and at 29 years old, I put a down payment on a $520,000 2-bedroom condo in a newer building in the Beltline neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, it was mine. Every single dollar of that down payment came from me. My brother Daniel is 4 years older than me. He's always been the one my mother worried about and my father bragged about, depending on which parent you asked and what year it was. Growing up, Daniel had a way of being charming enough that people forgave him faster than they should have. He borrowed money and paid it back late, or sometimes not at all, but he'd show up with pizza and a story, and somehow that was enough. He got married at 27 to a woman named Steph, had 2 kids quickly, and for a while it looked like he'd figured things out. Then the business he'd started failed. Then the marriage started cracking. By the time Daniel called me in early spring asking if he and Steph and the kids could stay with me for a few weeks while they sorted out a separation and he found a new place, I'd already spent 2 years watching that call coming. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my brother. The few weeks turned into 6 weeks. Then 2 months, then 4. I told myself it was fine. The condo had 2 bedrooms, I could manage. I slept on my own pull-out couch for the first month before I finally sat Daniel down and said gently that he and Steph needed to figure out a timeline. He nodded a lot. He said he completely understood. He said he had a lead on a rental and it would be sorted within 3 weeks. 3 weeks passed, then another 3. I started noticing small things. Steph had reorganized my kitchen without asking. My spices were in a different order. My good towels, the ones I'd bought specifically because I never had nice towels growing up, were being used by the kids for the beach. One evening, I came home from a long day at work and found that Daniel had had his friend Trevor over, and Trevor was sitting in my living room drinking my wine and watching my TV, and neither of them looked remotely uncomfortable about it. I said nothing. I told myself I was being too precious about things. They were going through something hard. It was temporary. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known yet, was that while I was busy being gracious, Daniel was busy doing something else entirely. In month 5, I came home to find a locksmith's van parked outside my building. I didn't think anything of it at first. I went upstairs. My key worked in the lobby door as usual. I got to my floor, walked to my unit, put my key in the lock, and it didn't turn. I stood there for a moment, turning it the way you do when you think maybe you're doing it wrong. The way you do when your brain refuses to process what's actually happening. Then I knocked. Then I knocked harder. Steph opened the door. She was wearing my gray house coat. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as prepared, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "Daniel said to tell you we changed the locks," she said. "For safety. There's been some break-ins in the building apparently." "Steph," I said, very carefully, "that's my apartment. It's the family home right now," she said. "You know how stressed Daniel is. We just need a little more stability. You're so capable, Claire. You could stay at a hotel for a bit, you can afford it," and then she closed the door. I stood in that hallway for probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute. There is a specific kind of shock that comes not from violence or loudness, but from something quiet and absolute, and that was what I felt. My own sister-in-law had just locked me out of my home and suggested I pay for a hotel. Now, here is the part where I need to explain why I didn't call the police that night. because I know that's the question. I've read every version of that question in the comments on videos like this one, and the honest answer is that I panicked, not loudly, but inwardly, completely. I called my mother from the parking garage. She told me to calm down and not make things worse for Daniel right now, because he was having a really hard time. I called my dad. He didn't answer. I sat in my car for an hour and a half, and I made the worst possible decision, which was to go to a hotel and deal with it in the morning when I'd had sleep and could think straight. I know. Do not do this. If someone locks you out of your own home, you call the police immediately and you have them removed. I did not do this, and it cost me months of my life, and I'm telling you this part of the story precisely because I don't want you to make the same mistake. By morning, I had a lawyer. Her name was Priya, a real estate and property litigation lawyer at a firm downtown, referred to me by a colleague who had used her during a nightmare renovation dispute. Priya was calm, thorough, and within 20 minutes of our first call, she had already outlined what Daniel had almost certainly counted on. Squatter-adjacent occupancy situations in Alberta are more complicated than most people realize. Changing the locks didn't give him any legal right to the property, but removing him could still require a formal process if he claimed tenancy, and with 2 children in the unit, any police intervention would be handled carefully by responding officers. He knows enough to make this messy, Priya said. The question is whether he knows enough to actually win. He doesn't, but he can delay. She filed a notice to Vacat that same day. Daniel's response came through his own lawyer, a letter claiming that he and Steph had been residing in the property as tenants under an implied rental agreement, that I had accepted in-kind contributions in lieu of rent, and that under Alberta's Residential Tenancies Act, they were entitled to formal eviction proceedings before removal. I sat with that letter for a long time. The in-kind contributions they were referring to, as far as I could tell, were the times Steph had cooked dinner. 3 times. That I could remember. One of which was pasta from a jar of sauce I had bought. But here is the thing about Daniel. Here is the thing I kept missing, kept forgiving, kept reframing as something smaller than it was. He was not doing this alone, and he was not doing it impulsively. While he was living in my condo, while Steph was reorganizing my kitchen and using my towels, Daniel had been doing research. He knew the timelines, he knew the language. He had spoken to a lawyer before I had, and then Priya found something. In the process of pulling together documentation for the eviction, property records, utility accounts, that sort of thing, she discovered that 6 weeks earlier, someone had contacted the condo management company and updated the emergency contact on file for the unit. The name on the contact had been changed from mine to Daniel's. The email used to make the request was similar to mine, 1 letter different, and whoever had sent it had included a scanned copy of what appeared to be a signed authorization letter from me. I had not signed any authorization letter. I had not sent any email. I looked at the scanned copy Priya forwarded to me. The signature at the bottom was mine, or rather, it was a copy of my signature that I had seen before. On the lease agreement I had shown Daniel when he first moved in, so he would understand he was a guest and not on any official document. He had taken a photo of it. I remember now. I remember him holding up his phone. I thought he was texting someone. Priya was quiet for a moment when I told her this. "Claire," she said, "this isn't just a tenancy dispute anymore. Document forgery. Identity fraud." Those were the words she used. In Canada, under the criminal code, forging a document and using it to obtain property rights, even informally, even partially, is a serious criminal matter. We were no longer talking about an eviction. We were talking about a police report. I won't lie to you. The moment I understood what Daniel had actually done, something shifted in me that I don't fully know how to describe. It wasn't rage exactly. It was more like clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you've been standing in a fog for a long time and something cuts through it and suddenly you can see the whole landscape and you realize the fog wasn't an accident. Someone put it there. I filed a police report that afternoon. The detective assigned to the case, I'll call him Officer B, was methodical and unhurried in a way that was either reassuring or maddening depending on the moment. He explained that the investigation would take time. He explained that they would need to verify the forgery forensically. I nodded and then I went home to my hotel room, a $180 a night room at a Marriott that I was paying for with my own money, and I made myself dinner in the microwave, and I called Priya and I said, "What can we do right now, today, to get me back into my condo?" The answer was the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta. an urgent application for a possession order, supported by the title documentation proving I was the registered owner, combined with the evidence of the fraudulent emergency contact change. 2 days later, a judge reviewed our application. She reviewed it for about 4 minutes. The possession order was granted the same afternoon. I was back in my condo by 6 o'clock that evening. Daniel and Steph and the kids were gone. They'd been given a 2-hour supervised window to collect belongings. I stood in my living room and I looked at my kitchen and I looked at the shelf where my good towels were supposed to be, and I sat down on my floor and I cried. Not out of relief, exactly. Or not only that, I cried because I had let this happen slowly, one small thing at a time, and because some part of me had known it was happening and had kept choosing to call it something smaller than it was. But I was back. That was real. I was back in my home. What came next took several more months. The forgery investigation moved forward. Daniel, when confronted by police, initially denied everything, then claimed he'd found the authorization letter already signed and assumed it was intended for him, which was so implausible that I genuinely do not know who he thought was going to believe it. The forensic analysis of the document confirmed that the signature had been digitally reproduced, lifted from a photograph. He was charged. I'm not going to tell you the exact outcome of the criminal proceedings because it's still partially ongoing, but I will tell you this: Daniel's legal fees ate through what remained of his savings. The counterclaim he tried to file against me for emotional distress was dismissed. The lawyer he'd hired initially dropped him. He is currently living in a basement suite in Red Deer, and my mother calls me every few weeks to tell me I need to forgive him because family is family. I listen to her. I love my mother. I do not agree with her. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before any of this happened. I know that people who take advantage of generosity are almost never doing it for the first time. I know that my brother had been rehearsing this version of himself, the version that takes just a little bit more than he gives, that charms his way out of accountability, that counts on the people who love him to absorb the cost. I know he had been rehearsing that version for 30 years. I just kept casting myself as the person who would let him. I know that saying yes when you mean no and calling it kindness is not actually kindness. It is a loan you are pretending is a gift, and when the other person figures out that you'll keep lending, the amounts get larger. I know that the law is not as slow or as indifferent as it sometimes seems. When you walk into a courtroom with your name on a title deed and documented evidence of fraud, judges notice. Possession orders get granted. Detectives file charges. The system is not perfect, but it is not useless, and the people who count on you not using it, they are counting on your hesitation, not your helplessness. And I know, most importantly, that the condo is mine. I walked back into it. I put my things back exactly where I wanted them. I bought new towels, nicer ones than before. I reorganized my own kitchen the way I like it. I made a cup of tea in my own mug, and I stood at my own window and I looked out at the city I have built my life in. Alone, one paycheck at a time, and I did not feel guilty about any of it. Not for a second. My brother thought he understood me. He thought I was the same person I was at 15, the one who went quiet, the one who kept the peace, the one who gave things up to avoid the argument. He was wrong, and if there is anyone watching this who is in a version of that same fog, who keeps reframing the small things, who keeps calling the loans gifts, who keeps telling themselves it's temporary, I want you to hear this. Document everything. Call a lawyer before you think you need one. And the next time someone locks you out of your own life, do not go to a hotel. Call the police. Because your name is on the deed, and that matters.